I began the journey that brings me here today in September of 1991, when I made a soul-inspired decision to go to Prague. I knew already that my job doing international work for the city of St. Paul was ending when an announcement came across my desk for a conference on municipal cooperation to be held in Prague. There was no logical reason for me to go to that conference at that point. I was losing my job. I wasn't a world traveler who went casually to conferences abroad. But something in that plain single-page announcement reached out and took me in. My mind said it was foolish even to think of going, but my soul said, go, and I did. In Prague, I made arrangements to meet with a Polish delegation at their hotel, a location I didn't know. So I found myself alone after dark in the back seat of a taxi, headed first through the outskirts of Prague and then into a wooded area, at which point I panicked. Where was this burly driver taking me? But I stepped back from my fears to ask myself a question that I sometimes find helpful. What is the worst thing that can happen? Well, my answer, I could be assaulted and left here dead or dying in the Czech woods, wasn't on the surface comforting. But a surprising thing happened inside me. Once I stood in that possibility, I realized that if I died there, I was okay with that. Because I would have died while living. I would have died while following the part of myself I was trying to discover. My body relaxed, and shortly the driver pulled up in front of the Poles Hotel. My journey to the deep unknowns of Prague was a metaphor for a journey inward that I was beginning in my life at that time, and I continue today. Soul. Some people call it our sixth sense. I call it our sense of being, our uncultivated essence, our wild sense. I believe that soul is our growing edge, the edge on which we feel most alive. Gary Zukav said in The Seat of the Soul that we don't really have language to talk about soul. But Albert Einstein had this to say about soul and spirit. That which is impenetrable to us really exists. Behind the secrets of nature remains something subtle, intangible, and inexplicable. Veneration for this force that is beyond anything we can comprehend is my religion. Anthony de Mello was a Jesuit priest who lived in India but who traveled the world doing seminars and retreats. And he gave a talk called How Happiness Happens. The first line of that talk is this: come home to yourself. Observe yourself, de Mello says, and you will begin to lose your illusions and know things that cannot be described. It's called happiness, he said. I think de Mello calls us to be alive to ourselves, to the unique flame within that is you, that is me. But it's easy to lose touch with that flame. A psychologist friend of mine said she thinks 99.9% of us struggle to find and retain connection with that core. And I think it's what F. Scott Fitzgerald meant when he wrote, his life was a sort of dream, as are most lives, with the mainspring left out. But some people say that we're intended to discover and develop our soul really as the purpose of life. Michael Laitman, founder of the Kabbalah Institute for Research and Education, says we don't come with ready-made souls. Rather, we develop them, or not, through the choices we make. And Caroline Mace, the medical intuitive and teacher, seems to agree. She says we come as duplicates of a divine power, but that the truth of that power is something that we are meant to explore and develop through this experience called life. About 20 years ago, I took a walk that opened my soul and changed me. It was early on a Sunday morning, and I had made my trek through the deserted streets of downtown St. Paul and was headed home when I turned a corner and saw up ahead a young man dressed all in black, his trousers low, his hooded sweatshirt pulled up. My immediate impulse was to cross the street and avoid him. But earlier that morning, I'd been reading Deepak Chopra on the topic that we are all one. So I had a little back and forth with myself, and giving the nod to Deepak, I walked on without crossing the street. I came up beside the young man at a red light, which he had observed even though there wasn't any traffic on the street. As soon as I came to stand beside him, the hooded head turned to face me full on, and it revealed a young, dark-skinned face lit with the brightest, most penetrating smile I will ever receive. "Hi," he said. He knew that I had debated with myself and decided against my fears, and some generosity in him enabled him to forgive me my fears and to fold me in. "Hi," I said, and smiled back. In that moment, that young man and I were one, and the power of that experience and the grace of that young man's soul are with me today, 20 years later. We can't talk about soul without acknowledging that sometimes it turns to its dark side, denying first its own light and then the light of others. So how are we to keep our flame bright? Mary Oliver has wisdom in her poem, The Summer Day. She begins by marveling at nature. Who made all of this? And she celebrates the grasshopper, who has flung herself out of the grass. She says, "I don't know what prayer is except to kneel down in the grass and to stroll through the fields." And then she ends with this wonderful question for all of us. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? I learned as I walked with my sister Ruth through 8 years of progressive dementia that soul persists through the loss of everything else. I learned that through her soul, she was able to continue to contribute in the world, even as she lost the capacities of this world. As she lay dying, staff in the care center where she spent her last year came to her room, bent lovingly over her bed, and then turned to tell me how much she had meant to them. Some said they would check their schedules in the morning, hoping that Ruth would be on their schedule. They told me that her smile, her hugs, and most of all, her singing had brightened their days. Long after coherent conversation was out of reach, Ruth, with a little help, could still sing Sentimental Journey all the way through. My sister's physical senses dwindled and were finally gone. But through it all, her soul, her sense of being, went right on working.